Hello. Okay, great. Hi, Ruby friends. How's everyone doing? So I had boring in the name of my talk, so maybe just people didn't want to, they were like, it's going to be super boring. Anyways, my name is Katie Miller, and I live in Berlin. I recently changed jobs. I was a principal at Netlify, and now I am a founding engineer at a startup in Berlin called Dexter. And I'm here today to talk to you about auth. I know, it's like so much excitement, I know. So auth shorthand can mean authentication or authorization. It kind of means both for a lot of people, although these things are differentiated. Authentication kind of means the keys to the castle, and authorization is more about the rules, about who can access different parts of the castle. In this talk, I'm mostly going to be talking about authorization. So when I say auth, you hear authorization. Most of us, when we join projects, there's kind of two ways you can enter. You can either do a Rails new and you get to start greenfield from scratch, or you're pulling in someone else's code and joining along for the fun. Most of us join much later from Rails new, and we don't get that opportunity of being able to make the early decisions about an app. Those basics get added really early on, and the founders and the other engineers that join move on and they build the fun stuff. Unfortunately, those early decisions can really come back to bite, and you may be questioning what exactly happened here. I've worked on a number of accounts teams at a number of companies on account-related features. These features typically include authorization as well as other things. And then, if you're in an extra fun situation, you also get to do payments and billing, but that's another talk, another hot take. So when you join and you're doing authorization features, you're kind of like, how does this work? It can be really complicated, and you're typically sitting back and kind of combing through the history of how things came to be. What were the decisions that were made? What was the intention that the original writers of the code had when they made the authorization system? So I just mentioned that I joined a startup, and I joined the founding technical founder who, when I joined, had a TypeScript app. And he had been writing a lot of custom code for the customers. And as I joined, the initial thing that we wanted to do was to write code where the engineer is no longer the bottleneck. We don't want to write custom code. We want to write code that can be expanded upon, and that every time a customer joins, they can continue to implement things. And I can go into more depth about what Dexter does, but this is true, I think, of a lot of companies and is pretty generalizable. So when I found he was using a TypeScript app, I asked him, I was like, why didn't you use Rails? And his response is like, I don't know. Didn't really have a good reason. So we were lucky enough, I convinced him it was the right way to go, and we spun up a new app. And at this point, all of my past experience gets to influence my future experience. Hopefully, I can lay the groundwork for myself, and hopefully there's less Git blame looking at, why did Katie write it this way? One of the neatest features in Rails 8 features is more like a little bit of a expand upon, but they added something called an authentication generator. This is really cool because you can get that boilerplate code, the stuff that you kind of almost need for every single app, really fast. You don't need to think about it. You just add it, and you keep going. Unfortunately, this is the basics of authentication, but with authorization and with authentication, there's a lot more to it, right? It's just that boilerplate. It's just enough to get you to lift off. And if you've encountered anything with authorization and authentication features, you know that there's a lot of complexity here, and it can keep going and going and going. And I think that you I mean, when you start talking to people about SAML, you can start to see their eyes kind of glaze over and roll into the back of their head. It tends to not be so interesting, and you're really not interested in how to make it work. You're just hopeful that someone else set it up. And it works, and you don't have bugs. So I kind of want to walk through this. Let's pretend we're building an app together. It won't be Dexter, but it'll be the similar early days, and hopefully we'll take it past where we're at right now. I'm gonna call this company Pawtrax. And Pawtrax is gonna be the place where you can manage and track your pet's care. So let's get going. We've moved through time, we already have the authentication, and now we wanna be able to allow our Pawtrax admins to be able to access our customers' data and take a look at the account similar to the way the owner looks at it, so that they can answer questions and solve problems and support our customers. I'm a huge proponent of KISS. I really think, not the band, I really think that it's great to try to stick to the simplest thing possible, and then you can iterate and add complexity as you find that it works for you. So in this case, let's just go really simple, and we're gonna add a way to ask if the user is an admin. We've got all of our users have a Gmail address, and we control our Google Suite. What can go wrong? So we add this to our controller, and we easily lock this down. You know, we've got a user has an account, and our admin wants to see the account. Boom, we're done. Move forward in time, and we get a request that, and this is true, I think most people there are multiple people taking care of a pet, and they want to be able to access the account too. Let's get the whole family involved. And this should be a classic relational thing for most people. You have a user, they have many accounts, and the user belongs to the account. I'm gonna throw an extra bit of complexity in here, just to illustrate too how some of the basics of the application can also influence authorization. And this comes from a real world experience that I've had working on a legacy app. We're gonna use Mongo. So with Mongo, typically you're not gonna get relational models. You're not gonna have a relational database. You can jam anything into this database table. It's not even called a table, actually it's a collection. And we're just gonna put users on the account. We're just gonna shove user IDs in there, and now they're on the account. So the authorization piece asks, like, what can someone do after they're authenticated? And we have a refinement for our feature where only one person out of this group of people who can care for this pet are the primary caretaker. In other words, is the person who takes care of your pet when you're away on vacation, should they have the same level of access as the person who owns the pet? And we're gonna distinguish this with roles. So this is the basics of role-based access control, otherwise known as RBAC. Great, so we'll just quickly use our Mongo database and shove the user ID into an one column. And then we're gonna make a new one for our caretakers, and that's where we're gonna put the caretaker user ID. So when we refined this, we said that the pet owner should have different rights or different permissions than the caretaker. We can check our database when we're looking at our controller and see, can someone do something? If not, we're not gonna allow them to do it. Pretty simple, straightforward authorization. Extra bonus here is that the admins that we made earlier, they're also not gonna be able to update our pet details. We've kind of got a hidden authorization in here, built in. We did it. All right, we locked down pieces of the app, we've added permissions, we've added layers to our castle where some people can't access certain rooms. And we move forward, there's growth, and with that, now we get to add something called a vet office integration. This is great because it allows the pet owner to be able to go to the vet, add medications, add information, and the vet and the staff can also help manage the pet's records. And as you can guess, we're gonna need more roles for this. So at this point now, we're gonna add a veterinarian, a vet assistant, a receptionist. They're all gonna have different levels of permissions and be able to do different things in the app. We'll follow the same methodology we used for the account, and we're just collect the user IDs who are the vets, and then we're gonna add our roles to our existing permission checks, slap that into the controller, boom. Yeah, it's getting a little crowded in there, but moving along, we also don't want the account's pet medications to be updated if the account's been canceled. We'll still allow them to read it, but subscribers should have certain features, and then people can still read their history. And so we want to differentiate between the two. So we're going to add that to our controller and move along. At this point, we've really built the complexity up, and as growth goes up, this is always the case that your complexity also increases over time. And the complexity really can kill the joy that exists with writing new features. It's really hard to understand what's going on. It's hard to continue adding. And when there's a time pressure, a lot of times you're just adding to the pile, move. But with growth, sometimes it can become some space, and we're gonna get a tech debt sprint. We think a little bit about what authorization means, that it's a set of rules for our permissions, and ultimately this kind of means that we want to answer the question, so can a user perform something, an action, on a resource? And ideally in code form, this looks like this. So with Ruby, of course, this is very much, can the user update a medication? It's so much easier to read than trying to comb through all of my if-else statements in a controller. There are a lot of ways to go about implementing this question in code format. For our use case, I love Pundit, let's use Pundit. Or I'm just inspired by Pundit. So I'll look at Pundit, how it's implemented, and I'll do it my own way. Pundit is moving towards minimal authorization through an object-oriented design with pure Ruby classes. Sounds amazing, I absolutely want that. And in order to get that, I'm going to create these classes where I have a policy. The policy is for the user meets medication. And in this case, the action I'm checking here is the update. So inside this update method, I can take all of that information about the roles and put it in here. So now I can only ask user can update medication in the controller, and my permission role, or my permission is kind of buried in this policy. This makes my controller look much cleaner. Also, I can move the account activity into the policy because it's a method. I own the method and I can put whatever I want in there. Let's do it. And I've refactored everything. I feel amazing. And we're going on. Fast forward to a point in time where we've gotten a lot bigger, and now we have a corporate vet office integration. Enterprise enters the room. We're gonna need more roles. And not just for our customers, but also for ourselves. So, for our customers at this point, the enterprise office wants to be able to have one person in finance dealing with the subscription. Maybe they want a business analyst to see how are the different vet offices operating on our platform. Internally, we have new roles as well. We have our sales people coming in, and we've got different tiers within support. So some support people are gonna have more abilities than somebody that's more of a junior level. We move along and add these roles to the policies that we've written, and we feel really good about it. Then your PM pings you, and per most enterprise, we have a special customer, and maybe this is the largest corporate vet office in the region. And so it's big money for them. And they have a lot of questions. Their head of security wants to know how they can do things. And you're like, I got this. We refactored, we've got policies, I can handle this. So what kind of new roles do you want? And what they describe is something that's not like any other customer. They've got special needs, and they need special roles. And also, they don't want to have to ping us when they want to make changes to these roles. It sounds like they really want to make their own roles. And what this means is that they're trying to solve a problem internally for their own security needs. They want to be able to configure every single piece of the permissions, and they want to know that they own it. They don't want to have to ask for a feature request from a PM and hope that a year from now someone will add this specific role that they've asked for. With this extra customization of roles also tends to come something called SCIM. And SCIM, similar to SAML, another acronym that makes people's eyes glaze over, this in particular allows enterprise customers to be able to provision users into their apps without any IT person being involved. You've probably been on the other end of SCIM, where you have to log into Okta, or when you join a company, you automatically get a certain access to certain accounts. And so behind the scenes, this is just a protocol for allowing these apps to communicate with each other. It really brings up a lot of thoughts about how this authorization system is going to work. So how are they going to do that? How are we going to create roles and set permissions in our application? Also, how are we going to track who is added via provisioning with SCIM and who is maybe just manually invited by an owner? We really want to know more information. If we look at our current implementation and we think about how roles are set and permissions are set, currently our roles are columns on the account collection, or they're columns on a vet office collection. So at this point, we're not going to be adding a column for every single custom role that an account is going to come up with. That seems a little bit ridiculous. As well, all of our permissions are hard-coded into policies, and those policies are evaluated on request cycle. So if we want to display the grid of being able to customize your permissions, we have to be able to figure out what the permissions even are. Can I answer that question? And with our Mongo implementation, how do we track all of this information? We didn't save any metadata about these people. We have no idea what is going on. When were they added? When were they removed? Et cetera. As well, we put a lot of business logic into our policies. This is going to make it really difficult to reason about what will allow somebody to do something, because there's this extra state that's not involved in the relationship between our user and the account. Like our conversation earlier, we have people from outside of our code base coming in, needing to add permissions, and they just write whatever they want. They didn't think about the fact that both they're including the verb, such as transfer or destroy, and the noun, such as invites. Maybe this actually should have had its own policy that was then a user invite policy. And I don't know if we really want to show this to our customers. Is it going to make sense to them? How do we display it? It's a weird mishmash. And so I wish I could take all that knowledge that I had, that moment, and be able to say, Katie, you're going to want something different. You're going to have to go back to your PM, and you're going to tell them that you're going to need to make a lot of changes. And in classic product manager form, how long is that going to take? I'd love to tell the customer. And you're not really sure. You don't know, gonna guess. At my last job, I spent a year rewriting the authorization system by myself, and I didn't even finish when I left. This hurts really bad. And this means that enterprise customers, those big customers with big accounts, with big contracts, the people who are probably helping to keep your company afloat are waiting for those very crucial security features that they want. Earlier, the features that we asked for were really simple. There was not a lot of external dependencies involved. And we followed the startup law that we will keep things as simple as possible, and we will also follow KISS principles. And per most cases, we used shortcuts so that we didn't have to think about that somebody might want custom roles in the future, or that at some point we're gonna want to be able to provision members using SCIM. The thing is that the other startup law is that change is the only constant. Things are gonna change so fast. I mean, week by week in the early days of a startup. And typically if you're there for a year, you can say, oh yeah, I mean, our team structure was totally different. We had a different vision of what the project was gonna be, and we're gonna be constantly rewriting code. So if we think back to this, if we've gotten to this moment, if I can think of last Katie, who was rewriting an authorization, to current Katie, working at a startup, writing the very early days of an authorization system, how could I have done this differently? How can I keep in my mind, and hopefully also impart to you, what kinds of things you might want to think about when you're working on an authorization system? Even if you're not the primary responsible person for it, maybe you're the one contributing and adding a new policy check. So let's walk it back and think about it a little bit. The first thing, of course, is we want to try to avoid shortcuts to allow for flexibility. We went fast at the beginning, and we added these users into role columns on our account, and means that we don't have this information later. I don't know when someone was added to an account. I don't know when they were removed. These are just simple timestamps, but I've completely made them disappear. As well, roles, they may have one name now, and someone wants to change them later. Who was once a collaborator is now a developer. Also, roles come and go. Maybe you want a new one. Maybe you want to remove one. This is something that you're not going to want to have to migrate a column on a collection in order to do that. What we really want here was that relation. We wanted that join. We wanted the member. We want the encapsulation of something that represents all of our permissions. Who is this person on this account? The person belongs to an account, and the member has the user, the account, the role. The role can be a row in a database. It can be a config when you're in early days. Maybe you don't have custom roles yet and you want it to be really simple. But I mean, is it really that hard to just add a model with a database? It's not. Even if it only has 2 rows, who cares? So what? You'll thank yourself later. Also, conventions are your friend. That permission naming, that CRUD, is really helpful. Our permission names got really out of control, and it was really easy to just say, I'm just gonna add a new one. I think this also happens in controllers, correct? But if you just try to remind yourself, like, someone will probably externally see these names one day. How can I make sure they make sense in the future? And I mentioned this earlier, but also my permission checks ideally shouldn't have too much business logic in them. If they do have business logic, when I think something will work one way, I don't realize that I'm also having to consider the account state when I'm thinking about permission. We wrote these methods, and anything can go on inside of this. Later, this may actually have happened earlier in your application. Maybe you're using a single page app and you have a front-end team. Or maybe you have external services and your app is the primary responder that gives all of the information about accounts and a user and their role on the account. How do we expand this? How do we give this information to the outside of our application? How do we represent this so they can use this to disable certain portions of the front-end app? Or maybe they want to make a request with a related feature in a separate service. How do we make sure that they are able to fetch these permissions and do the right thing? On top of that, there are going to be other teams that want to know what permissions look like. We want to be able to explain what the roles are to our customers. We want support to be able to understand, can this user even be doing something that they're trying to do? And product should have an idea of how the system works so they can make expansions upon it. There are other ways we could have gone with regards to how we implemented things. We didn't need to use the way that Pundit creates classes to represent two objects coming together with their action method. There are other gems out there. One of my favorites is can, especially for the early days when you're maybe not gonna be putting these permissions into the database. Or maybe you decide that you're gonna use an external system. WorkOS has done a lot of work with regards to giving you ways to have configurable in SaaS options for setting up your RBAC and your roles and permissions. Of course, this comes with a big payload of money. Another observation is I really want to try to make it easy to understand and use. I want to think about how when someone's going to come into my code base, I want them to easily understand what it is that I want them to do. Linters can help with this, making sure that for specific files, when someone adds something, you're the code owner or the accounts team is the code owner, and they have oversight of how certain permissions get added. Also creating ways for them to easily add permission checks to controllers. Something that a lot of times when someone comes in from the outside, they're just gonna copy pasta what they see. So if you can create an environment that is what you hope to see, I mean, hopefully the people that you work with have campsite rules and they try to make things better as they go and they try to follow the standards that exist in the code base. On top of this, like when I talked about presenting the permissions to other external stakeholders, we couldn't really, with our policy way of doing things, give you a kind of like a download of what all the permissions are. I'd had to open up every single policy file and slowly write them down or create a spreadsheet to track it. We had the right idea with being able to answer this question, but instead I have to go into the code base and look at each policy file and try to understand what's going on in each single method for each single resource for each single action. It's a lot, it's really difficult. Going back, I think this is one of the strong points of using something like can, is that I'm gonna create an ability file, and ideally that's where I'm gonna put the majority of my permissions. Now, obviously you can break this apart. Maybe you have a separate file for your internal admin roles, but this allows you to really also notice that we're not writing methods for each check. So we're not adding in extra things here. There are extra things actually that you can add via the gem, but I would highly recommend you try not to. Try to keep this simple. So using can, this is what I've actually done at Dexter, and it's a start, and I really hope that I don't make a mess of things. Am I currently checking if someone is a Dexter admin with their email? Yeah, I am. I make mistakes, of course. But I hope that I can remember my past lessons on how much work it took to bring an application forward and maybe not even finish the work of bringing the application forward. Authorization is super important. It is the basis for really good security. When I worked at Netlify, the security team was my best friend. They're like helping uncover areas within my authorization where there are gaps, places where members on teams can do things they shouldn't be able to do. And in turn, if I'm thinking about how to write my code, working with them to understand what's important to lock down is helpful. And I get it, authorization is boring. Authorization is really hard. But I implore you to assume that your application will be successful, that your business will be successful, and that you're gonna have to expand upon it. I want you instead to be able to build all of the fun things that make your application different, that differentiate you as a company. I wanna work on all of the cool features that people get to use instead of having to completely rewrite code from the inside out. Also, just try to give yourself room to grow. Hopefully, when you're doing an auth expansion, then things are simpler and it doesn't bite you back. Thank you all.